Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. In yesterday's video, I re-ranked the 2021 draft class at the quarterback and wide receiver positions, and then I talked about how in today's video, I was going to go through the other positions, so running backs and tight ends. So top 10 running backs from that class. I think a top 5 or 6 tight ends kind of gets rough at the end there, but top 5 or 6 tight ends. While you guys are watching, if you're enjoying the content, just do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But let's jump into the running backs. And starting off at the top here, I have Najee Harris at number 1. This is definitely, a decent debate here between Najee Harris and Javonte Williams. I am going to end up going with Najee. He saw one of the top workloads in the NFL, number 2 in total carries, number 1 in targets at the running back position. The problem is that his efficiency was just really poor everywhere. And obviously, he's not getting any help from his offensive line, which was really bad, or his quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger, who obviously is a shell of himself. So as a whole, the offense wasn't good, and it really wasn't setting him up for a lot of success, especially in terms of efficiency, but also like on a per-touch basis, he really just wasn't great at creating on his own. So when we're looking at total volume, he was the number 2 running back in yards created. So you may say, oh, like that sounds like a good number. He's creating yards, he's elusive, all this stuff. But when you look at yards created per touch, he was 30th. So really not even close to the top there. I do think Williams has a decent shot of actually jumping Najee Harris this offseason, but a lot of it is dependent on the Broncos offseason moves. Whereas right now with Najee Harris, I just think he's the safest bet to have a monster workload. Plus, you never know what happens this offseason. This team could turn around. Maybe they hit on a quarterback in the draft. Maybe they kind of bolster this offensive line. So there's also stuff that could kind of benefit Najee here. And number 2, I already mentioned him, Javonte Williams. I think looking at just skill for skill, like the most talented running back out of this 2021 class, I think Javonte Williams is the best running back. Like if I was starting a team, or you're looking at a neutral team, decent offensive line, decent quarterback, all this stuff. If I could choose one running back, it would be Javonte Williams. And if Melvin Gordon leaves and they don't really bring in anyone else to be super competitive with Williams, he's going to be the RB1 moving forward, especially if they're able to upgrade at quarterback. There's a lot of rumors going around about guys potentially switching teams. Aaron Rodgers, those have kind of died down a little bit. Seems like he's good in Green Bay. We've got Russell Wilson, who may want to explore it. Deshaun Watson is out there. A lot of studs in the draft. Not a lot of studs, but some players who may fall, mid-first round. I would say when you're looking at like the grand scheme of things from the 2021 season, you got to be pretty impressed with Javonte Williams. He was in a nearly dead even committee here between him and Melvin Gordon, but he still managed to finish with 1,219 scrimmage yards and 7 touchdowns. So still produced at a high level, basically being 50-50 with the total opportunities. Then at number 3, I have Travis Etienne. And obviously, his fantasy value has been all over the place. Going into the draft, he was pretty locked in as like a top 3 running back. Some people had him as the RB1. Some people had him as the RB3, in that tier with Najee Harris and Javonte Williams. I really didn't like him getting drafted by the Jaguars. Obviously, it's not ideal when you're throwing him into an offense that already has a super established running back and someone who has performed well. Then he gets hurt, is out for the season. Obviously, his stock is going to take a major hit because we know that James Robinson is very capable. So, once Travis Etienne gets back, is he going to be able to be the RB1? And then there's another huge shift where James Robinson goes out and tears his Achilles, which obviously is just horrible news, for James Robinson fantasy owners. James Robinson is the player. But when you're just strictly looking at fantasy value, that is going to help Travis Etienne a ton. Should give him at least a little bit of a leg up going into the 2022 season. And Robinson only has 1 year left on that contract, which means that after next season, Travis Etienne could have this backfield locked down, and that would be for at least 3 years on that 5-year rookie contract. Plus, there's always the hope that the Jaguars rebuild correctly, and then, Etienne could be a potential RB1 moving forward and a very, key piece in a young offense. At number 4, I have Michael Carter, and this was a really tough call between Carter and Mitchell. That backfield for the Jets should be wide open going into 2022, and I'd be pretty shocked if Carter wasn't the clear number 1. Like, I'm not saying he's going to get some monster workload, but he should be the guy getting, at least 60% of the opportunities. He saw early fourth round draft capital, so not fantastic, but also not horrible. That's definitely a little bit of a difference between him and Mitchell. And another plus for Michael Carter was that he did see a really solid role in the receiving game, averaging 3.9 targets per game to go along with his 10.5 carries. And number 5, I mentioned him. It is Elijah Mitchell. He was just a great fantasy option all season long. A potential waiver wire pickup who could have really made your season, carried you, to the playoffs or to a championship. Kind of a James Robinson level pickup in terms of fantasy. And I think if we knew, going into 2022, 2023, he was going to be the 49ers workhorse, he would definitely be above Carter. You could maybe make an argument for him above Travis Etienne, but there is always that uncertainty when a player doesn't have that high draft capital. Because if someone performs well as a first round pick, you can't just go out and bring in a dude to replace him. We saw this whole situation last year with James Robinson. He's undrafted, plays crazy well, and they just don't care. They go out, draft a first round running back because it really doesn't seem like a smart decision. And I do think they have a lot of, smart people in that organization. But Mitchell just doesn't have a lot of security as a 6th round draft pick. And I also think, on a season to season basis, his ceiling may be capped just because this 49ers offense doesn't have a ton of receiving work for those backs, especially if Trey Lance takes over. He's going to be running the ball a lot. Does that limit Elijah Mitchell's potential workload? But I really hope he's able to maintain that RB1 role because I think, he's a fun player to watch and just a really solid story, as someone who was just buried on the depth chart, in the offseason, comes in and is now leading that backfield in the playoffs. At number 6, I've got Ramondre Stevenson, who put together a really solid rookie season. In 12 games, we saw him tally 728 scrimmage yards and 5 touchdowns. Damian Harris is signed through 2022, so we may not see, a Ramondre Stevenson RB1 year until maybe 23, but I do think he could definitely step in as the number 1, in a year or two. It does seem unlikely that Belichick is going to switch to a full-on workhorse, so his ceiling is definitely capped, but a very solid, running back to have on your roster. Then at number 7, I think there's a pretty clear fall off here, and this is where I have Kenneth Gainwell. He showed some flashes throughout the season. I definitely had some higher hopes from him, especially considering that Miles Sanders went down. I kind of thought he would have the opportunity to step in and be the running back 1. That's not really how it played out, but I think the clear positive for Gainwell is that he is a fantastic receiving back, and he doesn't necessarily need to be the lead running back on a team, to be fantasy relevant. We've seen kind of like these scat backs perform well when they just have a really nice role in the receiving game. So that kind of opportunity could be there moving forward. At number 8, I have Khalil Herbert. He filled in very well for David Montgomery when he was dealing with that knee injury, basically took over that same workload. So right now, he's not really anything more than a handcuff, but definitely someone you should value on your teams. Then Chuba Hubbard here at number 9, kind of another handcuff option. The Panthers running back 2. It's not ideal that late in the season, he was pretty clearly splitting touches with Amir Abdullah, but this late in the top 10, these options aren't all going to be fantastic. And then at number 10, it is Trey Sermon. Major disappointment this season. He's really only on here because he got 3rd round draft capital. He did nothing, this year, but because he was picked there, he's just going to be getting more opportunities than some players who were picked later in the draft. And, maybe he carves out a role in future seasons and, kind of just has a late NFL breakout. Now let's shift over to the top 5 tight ends. And I think at number 1 here, this is pretty obvious. We've got Kyle Pitts, the clear-cut number 1 option, 2nd most receiving yards all time by a rookie tight end, and honestly has a very strong argument to be the Dynasty overall tight end 1. You can make an argument for Mark Andrews, but I mean the age of Kyle Pitts, that historic rookie production, I just don't think you can pass that up. At number 2, this is also pretty obvious here, Pat Freiermuth, 16 games, he caught 60 passes for 497 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. He really had a great season considering the fact that rookie tight ends tend to struggle. So, I mean, this could be an average tight end season for most fantasy options, but putting up these numbers as a rookie is definitely a great sign of things to come. Overall, I do think he has a limited ceiling just because he's not one of these top tier athletes when you're looking at tight end ones or high end tight end ones, your guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller, they're all fantastic athletes. But if his ceiling is like a mid-tier tight end one, I think you're probably okay with that with where you're drafting him in rookie drafts. And number 3, definitely a fall off here. It's Brevin Jordan. He was someone that had a little bit of hype, going into the testing process before the draft, but he fell off of most people's radars after he had some subpar athletic testing, and then he also fell to the 5th round in the NFL draft. But when we're looking at these other tight ends, he logged 20 receptions, 178 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns on an offense that was not great. So, he doesn't have that top tier ceiling, like I mentioned, like a guy like Freiermuth, but still, someone to watch moving forward. Number 4, I have Tommy Tremble, solid athlete, and received 3rd round draft capital. They got him involved in some spots, but ended up only tallying 180 receiving yards and 2 total touchdowns. And then the final tight end here is going to be Jacob Harris. And Harris has not logged a single reception all season long. He appeared in 8 games and then tore his ACL. It may seem kind of crazy that he's on this list considering he has never caught an NFL pass, but he's just an absolute freak athlete. And like I mentioned, when you're trying to target those ceiling plays, you want someone who is a fantastic athlete. He was in the 99th percentile of tight ends for 40-yard dash, 87th percentile in speed score, 99th percentile in burst, 100th percentile in agility score, and 99th percentile in catch radius. So if he can put it all together, we know he has the tools to be one of these high-end tight end ones. But that is going to wrap it up for my 2021 draft class running back and tight end re-rankings. If you guys enjoyed the content, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.